Hello and welcome to another Melta podcast. Today with me is Jason Chung. He's a fellow teacher who is located now in Austria. And so we are looking for a very interesting podcast. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Ellie. Thanks for having me.
You're always welcome. Okay, Jason. Usually I start with a very short introduction, but the main question which I always ask everyone is away from teaching and let's say the professional life, who are you?
So I was born in Hong Kong. I grew up in Toronto, Canada, and then I've lived in Germany for the last 20 years. Since January, I've been based in Innsbruck, Austria. Um, my family, my parents and I moved to Toronto uh, because they wanted to give me a better education. So that's why we moved to Toronto, where I grew up. And I moved to Germany because my wife is German. I met her in Hong Kong when I was working there. And then we decided to give Germany a try together, where I have two teenage children now. And I moved to Austria, to Innsbruck in particular, because of work opportunity, which presented itself around last year, at the end of last year. Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay. Why did you decide to take up a career in teaching? Was it originally your intention, or like me, you never planned to be a teacher or to take up teaching career, but then for some reasons you decided that okay, that's the career I
Mm.
would like to take up?
Originally, I worked in the film industry in Toronto and in Hong Kong. So that was not really what I planned to do, but I guess it was always in the cards because I have to give you a little context. I am Chinese. I have a Chinese name, and my Chinese name, loosely translated, means educational. So I never liked my name when I was a child in Hong Kong because I was always made fun of. It's a funny name. And then, but now thinking back, maybe it was always in the cards for me to be a teacher, to be in education. So what happened was I was working in the film industry in Hong Kong at the time, and unfortunately, bird flu happened, and all the productions were shut down. And I needed to find a way to make a living, and one thing led to another, and I ended up teaching English without much educational experience in this area. And when I moved from Hong Kong to Germany, uh, I decided to have a career change. And then that's when I decided to um, get qualified, get educated in this area so I can do this job properly.
So it wasn't on your agenda before.
Not really, not before I moved to Germany. Yeah, after I moved here, I decided to then really um, I decided for this career, I think consciously. Yeah.
Okay, and since you lived in several countries,
Hmm.
China, Canada, Germany, and now Austria, have you noticed some differences in teaching methods, or they
Definitely.
just the basic? Okay, would you like to share some differences?
Sure. I mean, last year I spent 1 year in Hong Kong and Macau, teaching at two different higher education institutes. Um, so I feel like over there, and I don't want to generalize, but this is my experience, is that it's much more teacher-led and students are given less freedom to explore. And I think this is the way that they were brought up, and it's also very hard for them to understand very European or North American way of teaching. My experience is that it was very confusing for them. For example, I'll give you one example is at the beginning of a class, usually I ask the students to ask me some questions about me to get to know me because we want to keep the teacher talking time down, right? So I let the students ask questions, and usually in Germany, it works really well. People are curious. They would then just come up with some questions, sometimes funny ones even. But in Asia or in Hong Kong or Macau, when I tried this, it was very difficult for the students to understand what I wanted them to do. And they would ask me, so what questions should we ask? And anything I would reply, but then they just couldn't, they were looking for this right or wrong, like what does he want? What is the correct question here? And so once somebody started to ask me, so Mr. Chen or Dr. Chen, what is your favorite color? And then the rest of the class would then follow this format. What is your favorite car? What is your favorite movie? And so on. There wasn't much variety in their questions. I think it has a lot to do with they're used to a certain way of teaching and learning, which is not necessarily bad, just very different. And that took me by surprise, even though I spent my formative years in Hong Kong. But I spent most of my schooling in Toronto, so I wasn't expecting that actually. So that's the biggest difference I can think of is the mindset of the students, which obviously comes from their experience with the schooling that they've had locally.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
Mm.
So, while checking your LinkedIn profile, I I read that you speak English, German, and Chinese, and so you bring diverse perspectives to your teaching. How do you do that? In other words, how can you benefit from that in the classroom?
Well, I would like to think I bring diversity into the classroom, and I think the students benefit from the different perspectives, like you said, that I can provide them. So, I mean, I do a lot of courses on culture. And so I think this is the area where I can I can give them interesting input and where they are more curious about. In terms of language, I think the fact that I've spent time in different places and interacted with different people allows me to adjust my speech appropriately when talking to different target groups. And I think it makes it easier for the students to understand what I'm talking about. I haven't actually thought about this question much, or I haven't actually asked my students um, precisely in what ways they would benefit from my diverse background. But I would think that these are the two areas which would be very helpful for them.
Okay, that's perfect. So I'm sure you speak Chinese perfectly, fluently, and so I think your mother tongue, and also English. But how about your German
Officially,
and Austrian?
I
Because they are
Austrian.
different. Yeah.
Austrian, yeah, there is a difference. Well, Austrian is really hard. Actually, it's not Austrian. It's Tirolerish, I think they call it. So I'm having a hard time sometimes understanding the dialect in Austria, in Innsbruck. German, officially, I just passed this. I think it was the reading unit of, or the listening unit of C1 of the Goethe. certificate. I did the whole B2 a few years ago. So officially, I mean, I can function, but as they say in Germany, it's not verhandlungssicher. It's not business fluent. So
Yeah, tell me about German. Yeah, I stopped learning it. I gave up.
mm,
Yeah, at least for the time being. Okay, now, um, today we have a trend called ChatGPT. And we have had, I've lost the count of how many seminars and workshops we have had about ChatGPT. And even in Melta, we have had several podcasts about ChatGPT. Um, the first question, this is the first question, and
mm.
it will be followed by other questions. Do you use ChatGPT?
Yes, I use ChatGPT in my classrooms and personally for my own work, for my own writing. Of course, I do.
Now, the question is, do you really think that ChatGPT can help teachers or just turn them into lazy teachers, considering that it almost does the whole job? It makes the plan, makes everything. It tries everything and prepares all the exercises for the teacher, and the teacher will only have to bring this plan to the classroom and follow the steps. Some people say it's not good for teachers, for real teachers. It's good for those who are making their very first steps in teaching because it does everything for them. From your perspective, do you think, as I said, ChatGPT is really helpful or it makes us as teachers lazy?
Well, first of all, I think um, it doesn't make us lazy. Um, I see ChatGPT like I see any other tool that I use for work. If you do maths, you use a calculator. Um, and if you teach, a lot of times you would use a textbook. And the things that you can use ChatGPT or AI for, I think it's similar to what you would get from a textbook. So the teacher does the plan, like you said, on ChatGPT, takes that to the class, and then he or she or they implement this plan, much like you would with a textbook. Now, um, I think it frees us up uh, to come up with creative ways to bring the message across, to bring the content alive. And I think this is what teachers are supposed to do, not necessarily just go from unit to unit, page to page, chapter to chapter, and read off the page. So a good teacher, in my opinion, is somebody who can bring the content alive and bring relevance to the lives of the students. And I believe this is the most important thing a teacher can do, and AI cannot, at least not at the moment. And to be very honest with you, I think that this discussion, this continuing discussion on AI and teaching and language teaching in particular, I find it to be perhaps this might be controversial, this view, but I find it to be a little bit farcical in that I don't know why we are discussing this because it is here to stay. It is a tool, much like the calculator or the abacus before the calculator. We are living with this, and there's not much really to discuss. Maybe workshops which tell us which new app, which new tool is useful could be interesting, but to discuss this further on the legitimacy and how long it will stay or whether should we be using this is not the question I like to waste my time on. Not that your question was a waste of my time for me, but in general, I find that it's kind of senseless to be continuing this debate on whether we should use AI. I think the teachers who don't integrate AI into their teaching will not be teaching for too much longer. That's what I think. Yeah. And to again answer your question, to recap, no, I don't think it makes us lazy. I think it could potentially free up our creativity to make our lessons more interesting and to be able to relate the content better to the students.
Well, I'll tell a secret, but don't tell anyone. I use it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay. But it's like something, some people say that mobile phones made our memories worse. Before we used to memorize the phone numbers here, and now we don't remember them. Or the calculator made us worse at math because the calculator would do everything for us. That's why we always have people, especially old school, who are against this chat GPT. Maybe
Mm.
because they don't know how to use it, so they are against it, or they are against technology in general.
I can't speak for others. I don't know their motivation. I can only speak for myself, is that I mean, I don't like to rely on it too much, but I do integrate it into my work, be it writing, teaching, or in my private life.
Okay, I really find it useful. I really find it useful, but it's a question that we had to ask. Okay, again, check your LinkedIn. I think recently you work in more than one place, and that means you're a freelancer, right?
No, I'm not. Not anymore.
Not, not anymore.
No.
Okay, so the main workplace for you is where right now,
Innsbruck, Austria.
and your role is
I'm the assistant professor of English language and business communication at MCI, which is the management center of Innsbruck.
perfect. Now, a question which I have been asked a lot to bring up during the podcast concerning the term of native speakerism.
Mhm.
Now, I'd like to ask about your policy in the workplace regarding native speakerism. Do you give, well, not you as Jason, but I'm talking about the management in the place where you work. Do you give opportunities to non-native speakers to be a part of your school or the center? Or native speakers are the priority, are always the priority when it comes to hiring, even if they are not teachers? Because you know, from your experience, I'm sure you know that there's difference between being a native speaker and being a teacher. Being a native speaker doesn't mean you necessarily can teach. So, what's your policy in the place where you work right now?
Well, I'm not speaking on behalf of MCI, obviously, but it's a very diverse workplace, and we have people from different countries working, teaching in English. A lot of our degrees are taught completely in English, so I don't really believe that there's an issue there. Um, However, I do know what you're talking about in terms of native speakerism, because in my doctorate dissertation, I specifically talked about the treatment or the issues of justice regarding non-native English-speaking teachers. This is actually my doctoral thesis at the University of Glasgow. So, are there issues with this? Yes, I believe there are. I mean, look, the point that we are still using the term native speaker is on its own problematic, because the definition of what makes a person native or non-native is um, quite gray. And I've been on both sides of the divide. Um, Are there issues with this? Yes. But I think at the end of the day, it is up to the individual to continuously improve their qualifications so that this barrier would be broken by black and white qualifications. So by that I mean, if you looked at my profile, you have seen I had been hired by the University of Regensburg before. I worked there for a couple of years on a short-term contract. I was also hired by the Catholic University of Eichstätt Ingolstadt, and so um, did they think that I was not qualified for the job? I hope not. I mean, I think that's the reason why they hired me because they thought I was qualified enough. And why did they think that despite, my appearance? I can only say it's because I have evidence to show them I can do the job. And this is the only way to do that is to show that you can improve yourself by doing more training or studying for another degree. I mean, do uh, native looking speakers get jobs easier? Yeah, I believe so. And that's also what I wrote about. But at some point, I believe you can only rely on that label of being a so-called native speaker for so long. And then I think people are kind of competing on the same level. Maybe as a non-native English speaker, we have to do a bit more, but I think at the end, it benefits us. Look, I have my professorship now at a Fachhochschule, at a college or whatever you want to call it, a technical university. Um, it is something that a lot of native speakers can get. And why did I get this? More of my experience, of my degree. And yeah, I mean, yes, we could, as native speakers, keep, I don't want to say complaining, but we could keep raising these issues. And I think we should. And that's why I chose this topic for my doctoral dissertation. But we have to better ourselves. We have to better ourselves more so than the so-called native speakers who can rely on their background. Yeah. So to again, sorry, I kind of got off topic. To answer your question,
No, no,
yes,
so,
are there?
totally fine, totally fine. That's why we raise this topic because
Mhm.
we want our voices to be heard. That's
Yeah, I
only.
mean,
Yeah.
are there issues? Yes. I mean, just the name itself is problematic, like I said. Um, Are they getting better? No, I don't think so. Because if you look around on job advertisements, even in Germany, a lot of times, I mean, mostly it says still native speaker. And also, to make it worse, it also specifically a lot of times asks for British or American English speakers, which I find to be completely absurd because the concept of world Englishes does not seem to have um, been part of their consideration in the German context, even though it should have been many years ago. I mean, English is, and then, there's the ownership, the problem of ownership of English, right? Like it's not owned by a certain group of people anymore. We are all using English is the lingua franca, as you might be well aware. So if there is native, then this is non-native. And something also I write about is, if you look in the world of plants or animals, usually the non-native species is viewed as the invasive species, right? The native are the ones that should be in the lake or in the forest, and then here comes the non-native species, which is invasive to the environment, and there's a negative connotation to this label, right? So that's why, I really try. Maybe this is a very good way to push my agenda, is for people to stop using the the term non-native, perhaps international English language speaking person, or why do we have to define native and non-native? Why can we not just define on the ability of using the language, right? Or qualified or not qualified English teachers. I think that's more, that's something I think is more fair. And so, but for the time being, for the non-native English speaking teachers like myself and you, um, I think the best way forward until everything has changed, which I don't think it ever will, is to improve ourselves. And I strongly believe this would help us in our careers. I mean, look, I'm where I wanted to be 20 years ago. I don't really actually have to study anymore, and yet I'm actually in the middle. I'm in the second year of my second master's, which is a degree specifically tailored for the area of English language assessment at the University of Cambridge. Now, I'm doing this for my career, but I'm also doing this because of interest, because I have been an oral examiner for IELTS and Cambridge CAE for a number of years, and I would like to understand what goes on behind the scene, uh, not as a practitioner, but as somebody who could potentially come up with the exams, um, or assess how valid the exams are, right? So, I mean, if you just don't do anything, then I don't think anything good would happen to your career. So I really believe that as non-native English speakers or teachers, we should improve ourselves. This is the only way forward.
And that's what we're actually doing. Okay, so the last question in the last 5 minutes. You are a lecturer, right?
Sure.
And a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you think there's a difference between a lecturer and a teacher? If yes, what's the difference?
Honestly, no, I don't believe there's a difference. I mean, officially, I'm an assistant prof, but people call me lecturer, instructor, teacher. I don't care. I really don't, because at the end of the day, I'm someone who gets in front of a class and teaches and help students with language and communications, and that's what I do. The title is irrelevant. I mean, it helps if you want to rent a flat in Innsbruck. I've learned, Professor Dr. Chen is much better for the landlord than Mr. Chen. Yeah, that I learned. But other than that, no, I think it's the same. I think um, we're doing the same job. We're communicating with people. We're connecting with people. We're connecting with young minds, older minds, people from different walks of life. And I don't really see a difference between a teacher, and a lecturer, and a professor.
Well, I'm not
No.
talking about the title. I'm talking about the duties inside the classroom. Some people say that lecturer, being a lecturer, during the lecture itself, you are the center.
Mm.
It's teacher or lecturer based or centered, while as a teacher, it's student centered. Some people say that there's a
Mm.
difference.
I don't really see that. Maybe it's my personal style. Even when I so-called lecture, I'm not the center. I always put the students in the center. Uh, I think the idea of holding a lecture is very old school. It's, for me, not very interesting. So I'm a very student-centered teacher, lecturer, whatever you want to call me. So for me, there isn't much of a difference because I think of my own personal teaching style, but I think there are people who are still holding on to these archaic beliefs. Um, but personally, for me, there really isn't a difference. It's just semantics.
Well, I recommend you should receive Melton News. There was an article which I wrote, I think, uh, 2 issues before. I highly recommend you to read them, to read it.
Okay.
So it's about this
All right.
topic. Okay,
All right.
so one last word from you before we wrap everything up.
Mhm.
Would you like to say something?
Yeah, thanks for having me again. And I've been a member of Melta for a number of years, and I think this is a really good organization for teachers, lecturers in the area to come together to learn from each other. And like I said, I think we should work towards a better working environment for all of us, not just a certain group of teachers, but I think it's a collective thing that we're doing here. So that's uh, that's all I have to say.
I hope soon we can see you face to face in Munich. It's not very far, you know. So we
Yeah, I
hope
know
we
it's two
see you
hours.
in our one of our workshops one day.
Excellent. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So, Jason, thank you very much. It was really nice to have a podcast with you. You know, unfortunately, when you started getting like feeling more comfortable with the podcast, it's the time when we have
Mm.
to finish it. So, thank you again for this podcast. And so, my dear viewers and listeners, you're going to have, as always, you will see this podcast in two versions, as a video version and as an audio version for those who are more interested in listening on Melta podcast channel and on my own channel, which is Teachers Lounge. So thank you very much and see you later in another podcast.